on Rumble. It is good to see everyone. Before we get started with today's show, I just want to thank everyone for all the feedback on yesterday's episode. We addressed some of the conspiracy theories surrounding the assassination of Charlie Kirk, such as the particular bullet that was used to kill Charlie, the 30-06. We talked about whether or not it was possible, like literally possible, not probable, but possible, for that bullet to stay within a human body after it had been fired, and not create an exit wound. We also talked about the Egyptian plane theory, and we debunked that one. If you missed that, highly recommend you go back and look at it because it didn't actually take a lot of digging on our part. I'm going to be perfectly frank to find some pretty serious critical errors with that theory. That our debunking of that theory has gone viral on X. So if you're over on X, you've probably seen that. But if not, go back to yesterday's episode on YouTube, on Spotify, on X, and look it up. We also talked about this idea that a lot of people believe that the FBI paved over the crime scene on UVU after Charlie's murder, that they contaminated the crime scene. And we also debunked that. I told you the reality of what actually happened in the days after Charlie's death and what law enforcement did to that scene, how they actually documented it. So I appreciate everybody's feedback. I know that not everyone agreed with my takes. I wouldn't even call them my opinions, really. I was just showing you the facts. It's not a matter of like, oh, this is how I feel about it versus this is how you feel. I was just showing you the evidence. And we were talking about how the evidence informs the overall theories and it informs us of the reality of the situation. Like I said, I know not everyone agreed, but I do appreciate that so many people participated. So thank you for that. And if you haven't subscribed to the show, go ahead and do that so you can always find old episodes. You can find us on Spotify. Just search The Liz Wheeler Show and hit subscribe. All right. We are starting with a topic that I find to be, to be honest, I find this to be quite entertaining. I find this to be slightly annoying, which is also why it's somewhat entertaining. I'm sure you've seen this. It's all anyone's talking about today. It's somewhat gossipy, but it is what it is. The Vanity Fair hit piece on the White House. Vanity Fair, obviously a mainstream media publication, wildly biased towards the left. They are an absolute joke. I can't imagine why anyone in their right mind would speak to Vanity Fair. Nevertheless, a whole bunch of people at the White House and the Trump administration did speak to Vanity Fair. They wrote a profile on Susie Wiles, specifically, Trump's chief of staff. This article was written by a man named Chris Whipple. Now, you may not be familiar with Chris Whipple's name. However, Susie Wiles is very familiar with Chris Whipple's name because he is the historian, the expert on chiefs of staff and how a chief of staff impacts the success of different presidential administrations. So Susie Wiles has been talking to Chris Whipple from Vanity Fair since the Trump administration took office. Apparently, reportedly, Chris Whipple has talked to Susie Wiles after each big event has occurred with that the Trump administration has been a part of, and he's gotten her take and her opinion, talked to people around her in the West Wing, and took photographs of a lot of the Trump inner circle, and the profile has gone viral. And the reason that I'm laughing is because it's just a hit piece. It's just a straight up nasty, malicious, biased, partisan hit piece. They don't even really try to disguise that. It's just completely evident to anybody who sees even the cover photos of this piece. Now, I don't think it's funny when the mainstream media hits us with hit pieces. I think it's dishonest. I think it's despicable. I think it shows a lack of character, a lack of integrity on the part of not just the organization, but on the part of the people involved, the particular writers. But at the same time, you have to wonder who the heck let Vanity Fair into the White House. Like, you're not a newbie here in the Trump administration. You know the reality of the mainstream media. The mainstream media are propagandists for the left. Why would you think it's a good idea to let Vanity Fair have inner circle access to the people closest to President Trump and then think that that was going to end well? Well, it didn't end well, of course. This is the particular clip or the particular synopsis, this little part of the article that's going viral on X. And I'll read it to you. This is what the article, the Vanity Fair piece says. It says, over the course of 11 interviews, Ms. Wiles offered pungent assessments of the president and his team. Mr. Trump, quote, has an alcoholic's personality. Vice President J.D. Vance has, quote, been a conspiracy theorist for a decade. And his conversion from Trump critic to ally was based not on principle, but was, quote, sort of political. because he's running for Senate. He was running for Senate. Elon Musk is, quote, an avowed ketamine user and an odd duck whose actions were not always rational and left her aghast. Russell T. Vogt, the budget director, is, quote, a right-wing absolute zealot, and Attorney General Pam Bondi completely whiffed in handling the Epstein files. That's the particular part of the interview that is going viral on X. You've probably seen this. If you are on any social media platforms, this is the thing that people are talking about. And I can understand why, because at first glance, it seems almost shocking. Did President Trump's chief of staff, did Susie Wiles actually say these things? Well, Susie Wiles responded to Vanity Fair, and this is what she said. She said, the article published early this morning is a disingenuously framed hit piece on me and the finest president, White House staff, and cabinet in history. Significant context, she says, was disregarded, and much of what I and others said about the team and the president was left out of the story. I assume after reading it that this was done to paint an overwhelmingly chaotic and negative narrative about the president and our team. The truth is, the Trump White House has already accomplished more in 11 months than any other president has accomplished in 8 years. And that is due to the unmatched leadership and vision of President Trump, for whom I have been honored to work for the better part of a decade, Wiles writes. None of this will stop our relentless pursuit of making America great again. Her response, Susie Wiles' response, has been viewed on X now 5.7 million times. People are pretty interested in her reaction. What she says in her reaction in this post is probably true. I'm sure Vanity Fair did disregard significant context. I'd be pretty interested in what that significant context was. I did notice she didn't deny saying those things, which I find interesting. I will say, this article does not bother me in the least. There are people on the right who are saying that, you know, this is Susie Wiles on her way out of the Trump administration. How does she survive this? This is an odd way for someone to announce that they're leaving the Trump administration. I do not see this with any kind. This article does not bump my adrenaline or my cortisol up even a notch. This does not faze me in the least. In a sense, this article is a nothing burger because it just doesn't matter. Why does it not matter? Well, it doesn't matter because the mainstream media are liars. You know that, and I know that. And the mainstream media, by the way, they also know they're liars. They're just liars. And so to think that after all this time, what has it been, 10 years since President Trump came onto the political scene, 10 and a half years probably, since he came down that golden escalator, to think that we would allow a mainstream media hit piece, such a blatant, malicious hit piece, to make any difference in how we act, how we think, how we operate, is just ludicrous. It just doesn't matter. The mainstream media are liars, even within this own piece, by the way, regardless of Susie Wiles' comments, regardless of whether she said them or didn't say them, or whether significant context was disregarded or not. Even within this article, Vanity Fair tells a horrible lie. I'm going to read you this little portion. This is how despicable they are. Day one, Vanity Fair writes, January 20th, 2025. On Trump's first day in office, the president signed a flurry of executive orders, 26 in all, withdrawing the U.S. from the World Health Organization and the Paris Climate Agreement, rescinding birthright citizenship, sending troops to the southern border, freezing foreign aid, and stopping federal hiring. By the way, I forgot how awesome that first day was. Good reminder. Vanity Fair then goes on to say, then Trump issued pardons to almost everyone convicted in the bloody January 6, 2021 assault on the Capitol, in which 9 people ultimately died and 150 were injured. Even rioters who'd beaten cops within an inch of their lives were set free. 14 people convicted of seditious conspiracy had their sentences commuted. Do you know what a humongous lie this is? Like, what an absolute lie this is. 9 people ultimately died. Well, first of all, everyone there on that day on January 6th will ultimately die. We're all going to ultimately die. So stupid phraseology, but it's a willful misrepresentation of what happened on January 6th. The bloody January 6th assault on the Capitol. One person died on January 6th, and that was Ashley Babbitt, who was shot by a Capitol police officer. The others died of natural causes, drug overdoses, suicides in the days and weeks following January 6th, in the midst of the lack of due process that they were entitled to and the enhanced terrorism charges attached to their indictments. No, January 6th protesters killed no one. And yet Vanity Fair would have you believe that this was a bloody, murderous mob on January 6th, and that's absolutely regardless of what you think on January 6th, that's just factually wrong. And Vanity Fair knows this because they're not stupid. They're just liars. They think that they can tell you a lie and that you will believe it. Which brings me back to my original point about this article. Who in their right mind approved this article in the White House? I mean, let me rephrase that actually. I can understand like egos, man, right? A chief of staff wants to define the legacy, her legacy in this case, and be profiled by the man, Chris Whipple, who's profiled, the historian for chiefs of staff. Okay, you can see how that would happen. You know, maybe Susie Wiles starts giving interviews to him thinking that it's going to be fair. She's just documenting her time in office. This is the guy who documents chiefs of staff. If I don't give him my story, someone else is going to. You can understand the temptation towards that. I would still say no, but you can understand how someone could fall prey to that at first. But then, was it not a red flag for you when you learned that Vanity Fair hired Olivia Nuzzi? I mean, come on. Really, come on. I do not understand this. By the way, other members of the administration are coming to Wiles' defense. And as I said in the title of this episode, there actually is one revelation that no one's paying attention to in this article that I find to be interesting. I don't really care if what Susie Wiles said about President Trump was taken out of context or if what she said about J.D. Vance was true or not. I mean, if you want to be imaginative, you can figure out a context in which those things are not said maliciously and that Vanity Fair twists them into sounding like she's turning on the people that she works with. Or you can also imagine a world where she says these things. And maybe she did. I mean, you know what it's like to work in an office. You know what it's like to work 24/7. You know what it's like to work in the media. You know what it's like to work in politics. Now put all four of those things together and yeah, you think there's not gossiping and sniping behind the scenes. Again, who really cares? It really doesn't impact the operational capacity or success of an administration, except for the fact that it was a lapse in judgment to allow Vanity Fair this kind of access to Trump's inner circle. That I will stand by. That is a real head scratcher to me. In fact, if I were President Trump, I'd probably find out who on his team, on the Trump administration, gave approval for this Vanity Fair piece, who let them have this inner access, who didn't give them veto power over some of these hideous photographs that they took. Like I said, malicious photographs. It's not just unflattering photography. It's deliberately trying to portray these people as looking disgusting, really, when they're not. They're just normal looking people like everybody else. And I would fire that person if I were President Trump. I would fire whoever let Vanity Fair do this because you could call this an unforced error. All that being said, there's one part in this piece that is not getting a lot of play, and this is something that I actually find quite interesting. There's one of the photos, by the way, that I was talking about. Like, look at that picture of Susie Wiles. No one claims she's a runway model. Like, obviously, she's not 20 years old. No one cares about that. But that is obviously a photograph that is deliberately intended to make her look psycho. Her eyes wide open like that, the angle, her eyebrows raised. Like, the photographer did that deliberately, and it was a deliberate decision by the editorial team to try to get a photo like that and then to publish it. It wasn't an accident. This was done. And the same with Rubio. Look at this picture of Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio is a very normal looking, however old he is, 40 or 50-year-old dad. And look, they make him look like he's dying of the plague here. That was intentional. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a moment that was a candid moment that was caught on camera that just happens to be a little unflattering. No, they did this on purpose. It was malicious because they're trying to undermine these people, especially the people who they think might have political careers after President Trump. They did this to Caroline Leavitt too, this really weird close-up, unflattering portrait of her face. Caroline Leavitt obviously is a nice-looking person, and they are deliberately trying to make her look ugly. Why? Why are they doing that? Because, well, they're trying to be malicious. They're trying to drive a wedge between President Trump and his staff. And I know the president is not naive. He's not going to let that happen. And honestly, like I said, I know this is going viral on X, but really people should not be that upset about it. Here's the thing. The one part of the article that's interesting, though, and I haven't really heard anybody talking about this, and this, I think, explains a lot of what happened earlier this year. So if you go to part 2 of this profile, there's a part 1 and there's a part 2. If you go to part 2, it talks about it talks about Susie Wiles's reaction to the Epstein files, and particularly to when Attorney General Pam Bondi gave all the right-wing media individuals, myself included, those binders at the White House that day in February. You remember the day. This is what Vanity Fair writes. In February, Bondi gave binders labeled the Epstein Files Phase 1 to a group of conservative social media influencers who were visiting the White House, including Liz Wheeler, Jessica Reed Krause, Rogan O'Handley, and Chaya Raichik. The binders turned out to contain nothing but old information. Wiles said of Bondi, "I think she completely whiffed on appreciating that that was the very targeted group that cared about this. First, she gave them binders full of nothingness, and then she said that the witness list or the client list was on her desk. There is no client list, and it sure as hell wasn't on her desk." It sure as hell wasn't on her desk. But then she goes on to say, it says, Wiles told me, and this is the author of the article speaking, Wiles told me she underestimated the potency of the scandal, the Epstein scandal. Whether he was an American CIA asset, a Mossad asset, whether all these rich, important men went to that nasty island and did unforgivable things to young girls, she said, I mean, I kind of knew it, but it's never anything I paid a bit of attention to. That's actually the only interesting sentence in this entire article. The rest of it is maliciously framed to try to portray the Trump administration as chaotic or whatever. And no one's falling for that anymore. But that's actually interesting because how weird was it? Go back to February and March with me for a moment. How weird was it after that Epstein binders debacle? We expected President Trump to take the side of, hey, what is the deep state trying to hide from us? What is Pam Bondi promising and then not delivering? We care about this deeply because conservatives voted for Trump because we want justice for all of the deep state weaponization against us. We want people held accountable. And then Pam Bondi seemed to make a mockery of that. She seemed to toy with us. She said things on Fox News that wasn't true just to get clicks and views. And it really disturbed President Trump's base because we viewed this as the first test. Is justice actually going to be served when, an elitist was held to a different standard of justice because he was connected to government? And especially when it's these grisly, horrible crimes against children. And President Trump underestimated his base. And I think a lot of us wondered why behind the scenes. I know there was some discussion about why President Trump misread his base, and particularly who might have been misinforming him about how the base thought about the Epstein files. And at the time, I had some people telling me behind the scenes that it was Susie Wiles who was, kind of running interference on behalf of Pam Bondi. I never had full confirmation of that, so I never made a big deal about it because I like to be pretty buttoned up in my reporting, especially on personnel stuff. I was still at that point where, I was hoping President Trump would take care of it behind the scenes. But I did have people tell me that it was Susie Wiles who was running interference for Pam Bondi. Well, now this seems to somewhat confirm it, not because of necessarily any malicious motive, but if, in fact, Susie Wiles told Vanity Fair that she underestimated the potency of the Epstein scandal and it was not something she ever paid attention to, then that somewhat explains President Trump's dismissal of the entire Epstein scandal, the Epstein files, and people's questions and demands for justice all the way through the summer. He was saying people don't care about this. This is just fake news. No one cares. And the base was like, hey, we care, and we're trying to tell you why we care. But it sounds to me like Susie Wiles was in his ear telling him that, this will just pass. Just let it go. People are mad about this, but it's not that big of a deal. And it's interesting. It's interesting to see what kind of comments or someone's lack of context about something important to the base, how it informs the administration. I haven't seen people talk about this aspect of the Vanity Fair piece, but it is the only part of this piece that I find even remotely interesting. As I said, any attempt to divide the administration, the mainstream media's tried this a billion times. It's not going to work. It's going to fail. The only reason conservatives are talking about it today is because there's some, I don't want to call it morbid curiosity, but it's like there is sort of a morbid curiosity when you see these ugly photos posted. Of course, we're going to look at it. It's also right before Christmas, and the stories are kind of, getting a little less by the day. But any attempt to undermine and downplay President Trump's achievements in office. I mean, you can criticize and say what you want to happen in the next 3 years, and I know we do that on a daily basis, but it's not going to work. It's not going to work. It's a tired old a tired old tactic here. Again, my bigger question is who okayed this interview? Like, really? Are you an idiot to give the mainstream media this opportunity to try to attack you? Whoever approved it should be fired. It's also interesting to me if you look at the group photo in this article, the one I think, who does it have in it? It has Stephen Miller in it. It has JD Vance. It has Caroline Levitt. It has Susie Wiles. It has Marco Rubio. It is interesting to me that nobody in that photo said, this probably isn't a good idea. Like, who are we trusting here? Vanity Fair? Yeah, that's one of the photos, but there's another photo of them. It sort of looks like the Bush administration photo, a replica of that, sitting around a table. It's funny to me that none of these people, like most of these people are people of good judgment, and no one said, probably not a good idea to be trusting Vanity Fair. But apparently they did not. This actually plays into my prediction of what's going to happen after the first of the year in the Trump administration, which I will relate to you, my prediction, because I think I'm right about this. We'll have to wait and see, but I think I'm right about this. I'm going to relate that to you in just a moment. But first, I want to thank today's sponsor, All Family Pharmacy. The holidays are here, which is a time for family celebration and reflection. It's also, unfortunately, the season when colds, flu, and all kinds of nasty bugs start to spread. That's why I want to tell you about All Family Pharmacy. They make it really simple to stay healthy and prepared right from the comfort of your own home. Just go to allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz. Search for your preferred medication, the medication that works for you. Place your order. A licensed physician will review it. Once it's approved, your medication ships directly to your door. So you don't have to visit one of those germy clinics or wait overnight in the ER if you're sick, whether you're looking for ivermectin, antibiotics, or your everyday maintenance medications. All Family Pharmacy has you covered. All Family Pharmacy exists because they respect your medical freedom. You should be the one deciding what medications work for you, not Dr. Fauci, not Big Pharma. Take care of your health and your family this holiday season and save 10% with code Liz10 once you visit allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz. That's allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz, code Liz10. You know what actually bothers me? I'll get to my prediction about what's going to happen in 2026 for a second. Do you know what actually bothers me on the media front, though, today? Not the Vanity Fair piece. What actually bothers me is this. FBI Director Kash Patel and his girlfriend, Alexis Wilkins, appeared on the podcast of Katie Miller. Katie Miller, of course, is the wife of Stephen Miller. She recently launched an interview-style podcast, and she's had basically a parade of the most powerful people in government on her show. She's interviewed them, but not about political topics. She's interviewed them. I mean, some people are calling her podcast a lifestyle podcast because she's talking to them about their personal lives, their opinions on, parenting or dating or the personality of their coworkers, not about the political topics or the decisions that they're making in the government. And I get why viewers would be interested in this when we have a political stage that is so constantly plastered on media, whether it's social media, whether it's mainstream media reporting, whether it's, cable news, whatever, there's always some curiosity about who these figures are. Like, who is Hegseth in his private life? Who's Kash Patel in his private life? People are going to have some questions about that. That's natural to wonder about the personal lives of the people in government who we're so familiar with politically. And so that's what she's feeding into with her podcast, which it's not my cup of tea because for the reason, okay, let's play this B-roll. Katie Miller had on her podcast Kash Patel and Alexis Wilkins, and this was the caption of her episode. She says, "The love story, FBI Director Kash," so she tagged his official FBI handle, "and Alexis Wilkins. Is she from Israel? How do they make long distance work? When is the engagement? Tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern." And there's a little trailer that she posted showing Kash Patel sitting on a couch next to Alexis Wilkins, laughing. It's kind of like it looks like a dating show or like Oprah or something. And the response after posting this trailer is not positive. The response, a lot of people on both sides of the aisle are criticizing Kash Patel, actually, saying the Brown University shooter is still at large and you are sitting on a sofa talking about how to make your long distance relationship work. Are you kidding me? In fact, that response was so prevalent that Katie Miller posted another tweet underneath this trailer, a little addendum that says this was taped prior to Sunday. So she's saying that, this was not done now. It was pre-taped and it's being released. Now, again, you can criticize Katie's poor judgment in publishing this now, and valid criticism, whatever. That is a valid criticism. But what bothers me the most about this is that our FBI director would actually appear on a lifestyle podcast. I don't care about his relationship, and I don't care if people are curious about his relationship. I don't think that it is a strategically prudent move for the FBI director to be appearing on a show that allows our enemies to scrutinize every single aspect of his personality, his opinions, his character, and his relationship. It could make him more prone to influence operations. It certainly gives our enemies insight into how he operates so that they can outsmart him. And if we truly believe that the FBI director is such an international target that he can only be allowed to fly privately on an FBI jet, even for personal travel, and that is the standard protocol, then why would we think that it is prudent for him to be so public about personal opinions? It's not. It's a complete lack of discernment on their part to put this out there. That bothers me so much more than the Vanity Fair piece. The Vanity Fair piece is just kind of like the oddity, the weird, the annoying thing of the day, whatever. But this really bothers me. Can you imagine what the reaction would be from the right if James Comey went on like Call Her Daddy, or if Christopher Wray went on, some other wine mom podcast and was talking about personal things? We'd be like, first of all, you are supposed to be discreet as FBI director. You're not supposed to tip your hand. You're not supposed to allow people to get to know you. You're supposed to do the job. You're not a media star. And the fact that our enemies can watch this as well, not just our domestic political enemies. I'm talking about international enemies that scrutinize the FBI director. This showed a complete lack of judgment. And like I said, it bothered me way more than the Vanity Fair piece did. Okay, 2026 predictions quickly. So one of my predictions for next year, and I think this will probably happen within the first 3 months, could be a little sooner, is I think we're going to see some significant turnover in the president's cabinet. After his first administration, when there was almost constant turnover, you got the feeling that there was a desire in this administration to have people stay for at least a year, not to have that constant turnover, to have a little more stability, if you will, within the staff, both at confirmation level, like secretary level, but also, lower staff. However, we are about to reach that year mark, and there are several members of his administration who I would predict are going to be on their way out in the first couple of months of 2026. The first person that I predict will be on their way out, this is not going to surprise you, but Attorney General Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi, of course, for all the reasons we've covered on this show, has been a liability to the Trump administration. She has not been a net positive. And in fact, she's wasted a good deal of the Trump administration. She's wasted 25%, a quarter of the Trump administration, and half of the time, if you worry that the Democrats are going to win the midterms next year, half of the time when Republicans control the presidency and the House and the Senate, she's wasted without any significant accomplishments. Her accomplishments are kind of the type that you would just expect. You're not going to get a pat on the back for doing the basic requirements of your job. And her accomplishments are kind of just at that level. And I think the president has come to recognize that. I think Pam Bondi will be on her way out before too long. I think Kristi Noem will be on her way out at DHS before too long as well, for similar reasons. A whole year has passed, and while Kristi Noem has done some good things, the deportations, and by the way, I'm aware that the deportations, the slowness of the deportations is not entirely the fault of the Trump administration, because we also have these essentially judicial insurrectionists as judges issuing these injunctions that they have no authority to issue to try to stymie the Trump administration. I get that. But we've seen a lot of media of Kristi Noem in full hair and makeup and battle rattle, kind of prancing around. And I don't think we're going to see much of that much longer. I think we're going to see turnover there. I don't know about Susie Wiles. I don't think that this Vanity Fair piece makes it more likely one way or the other. The chief of staff position is an extremely demanding position, and the chief of staff doesn't always last more than a year. I don't think it would be surprising if Susie Wiles didn't stay more than a year, but I don't think that this piece is like, okay, her announcement that she's leaving the White House. But the other two, I do think we will see. before too long. Okay. For the second half of the show, I have a very interesting guest for you. I know I didn't even tease this at the beginning of the show, but this is a fascinating investigation from one of our favorite journalists, Steve Robinson. He's the founder of the Maine Wire, and I'm going to bring him on because you know the story of the Somali fraud in Minnesota that Christopher Rufo broke a couple weeks ago? There's hundreds of millions of dollars that Somali migrants were defrauding the state of Minnesota. They were claiming that their children had autism to get money from the government, and their children didn't have autism, and it was just this big lie. It was just this big crime. It was so complex. It was so disgusting. Well, it's not just in Minnesota where we have evidence of Somali migrants committing fraud against the government in order to try to profit themselves and enrich themselves. And Steve Robinson, as I said, as dogged of a reporter as you can possibly describe, has uncovered a massive migrant fraud scheme in the state of Maine, which, by the way, Maine has come under more scrutiny, more eyeballs on Maine since President Trump's infamous tit for tat with the very liberal governor of Maine, Janet Mills, over boys playing in girls' sports. I feel like the eyes of the nation are looking to Maine now as sort of this mini California, not realizing that, tucked away up in lobster land is a radical leftist movement that is trying to turn the state into a completely foreign nation, no pun intended. So I want to bring him on now, Steve Robinson. Steve, good to see you.
It's good to see you, Liz. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, tell us about this. This is kind of a wild story.
Indeed a wild story, and it's something we actually broke back in March. I think it's now receiving the attention that it deserves because of the House Oversight Committee and their investigation into Medicaid. I think the real question underlying California, Minnesota, Maine is whether these states have violated federal law and pushed the cost of non-citizen Maine care onto the federal government, because you have the fraud being committed by the individual Somali migrants using Hawala networks to wire that money back to Somalia. People just getting insanely rich off the taxpayers' back. Yes, but were there political actors involved in covering this up? Because under federal law, the Medicaid money can't be spent on non-citizens, but states like Maine, California, Oregon, Illinois, Massachusetts, New York, if they want to cover non-citizens with Medicaid, they can do it, but they have to pay for it through state funding. But what we just saw in California was that state tried to push $500 million in illegal alien care onto the federal government. That's not allowed, and that can result in massive clawbacks by the federal government if President Trump wishes to do that. So in all of these states, the House Oversight Committee is actually investigating, was there essentially a crime committed against the federal government by Democratic states to cover up the fact that they're giving Medicaid care to non-citizens, including illegal aliens. So I think that what's happening in Minnesota has just scratched the surface of what we're going to see here. And of course, the top-ranking Democrats out in Minnesota, from Tim Walz to Keith Ellison, had to have known what's going on. And just looking at the numbers here in Maine, you can't look at the cost growth in the Maine Care program without wondering if there's some funny business going on. And if you look at the amount of auditing and oversight that's happened for the proliferating Maine Care agencies, it's really not as robust as it should be in comparison to how quickly the agencies are growing. We've seen tremendous growth in the Maine Care program, and then at the same time, a group like Gateway Community Services, which we've talked about before and which has been in the national news lately, they're allowed to string along an audit for 5, 6 years without ever paying back money that they billed to Maine Care, without ever having provided care, according to the Department of Health and Human Services records, which we obtained, were never made public. We had to obtain those and drag them kicking and screaming out into the light of day. And they're not, Gateway Community Services isn't the only one either. The Maine Immigrant and Refugee Services in Lewiston is kind of the centerpiece of the Somali community in Lewiston. And they were found overbilling Maine Care by $2.4 million. For some reason, both of these companies are still allowed to bill Maine Care. They're still getting no bid contracts. They still get all kinds of grants from the Democratic regime here. It's impossible to come to any other conclusion other than that the Democratic people in power, they're looking the other way. They're tolerating it.
Yeah, I mean, the millions of dollars, and this should infuriate anyone, but especially given, I mean, we've talked somewhat on this show about what seems to be an effort in Maine to bring in, I mean, the term you use, I like. You say you call them new Mainers, but there's this demographic change that's happening at the behest of the Democratic leadership in the state of Maine to bring in foreigners, because there's not really a lot of other people that are coming to Maine. There is, I think, admittedly, a problem in Maine with like a workforce that's aging out and not younger people not really coming to the state. And the Democrat solution to this is to bring in foreigners. And we covered a story, I believe it was last year on the show, about these luxury apartments that were built for migrants, and they got them for free, while actual Mainers, there's a housing shortage and they can't afford it because there's so many migrants that are being brought in. Like, this is not a one-off not a one-off small financial crime. This is money that's being taken from Mainers. As you said, evidence that it's a crime that's being committed, and there's real victims here.
Absolutely, there is. I mean, Maine is one of the most taxed states, in addition to being one of the poorest states. So we can least afford to be spending money, $80 to take migrants to McDonald's. That was one of the charges that Maine Immigrant and Refugee Services tried to bill to the taxpayers. They were actually caught and forced to repay some of that amount of money. But again, they're still allowed to bill the taxpayer. They're still getting grants. They're still getting no bid contracts, just like Gateway Community Services is. So all of these groups, what they're doing is they work in the realm of personal support services. And so in personal support, this can be categorized as uh, uh, helping someone get groceries, helping someone shower. It's a very fuzzy group of services that you can bill to the taxpayer in that bucket of services. But what's not totally obvious until you look at the records and you look into these companies is that the founder of the company can hire his cousins and his aunts, and his cousins and his aunts can be both providing personal support services and receiving care under the personal support services banner. So you have effectively the state of Maine is opening itself up to pay migrants, including asylum seekers who have entered the country illegally, to take care of each other while they're living at home. And it's all
Jeez.
coming from directly from the Maine taxpayer with
Jeez.
no federal reimbursement at all. And then we wonder why we started the beginning of the year with a $118 million Maine care deficit, for which Governor Mills had to increase taxes on Netflix, cigarettes, cannabis, basically everything.
It's terrible. And Steve, yeah, I see all your guys' comments in the live chat. Yes, Steve's camera got shut off. Steve, your camera's off.
Yep.
For some reason. We still have you audio. But we did lose your video for well, it's still lost. We've lost it for a minute or two.
Well, I
Um
need to get a producer as good as Spencer, clearly.
he'll probably be able to help you figure out while I'm literally teeing up the next question. Part of what's interesting about this story too is I always think that these fraud schemes are kind of convoluted. It's almost a hard story to present because there's so many details to it that if you're not familiar with how these different programs work, or Medicare and Maine Care and all of that, Medicaid, it can be kind of confusing. But there's this one guy, the founder of the Gateway Community Services, which is one of these care businesses. We've talked about him before, Steve. We've actually discussed the same guy. I'm not exactly sure when. It might have been sometime. It's been sometime within the last year. But we talked about it because he's this Somali migrant to Maine who was running for president of Somalia, or president of some region within Somalia, while he's living in the United States.
Yeah, so this guy was actually running to be the president of Jubaland, which is I had to learn about. You wouldn't think that as a reporter working in the United States, you have to know the semi-autonomous states of Somalia, but I actually learned a great deal about how the government of Somalia works. And it turns out that winning the election is not enough. You have to win the election, and then you also have to have enough guns and militia soldiers in order to assert power. And Abdullahi Ali actually was doing interviews with Kenyan media, and he talked openly about the fact that he was using money he raised in the United States in order to fund the militia that he would need to claim victory if he were to win the election. And by the way, it's not really an election, it's only clan elders that are voting in this thing. So it can hardly be called a democracy at all.
Which is super, super weird that this is happening from within the United States. Super weird. There have been some indictments, by the way, for the Maine Care fraud. Um, I assume there will be more coming, especially because this story has gotten more national news coverage. But the whole thing, I mean, I suspect if we look in most states, especially blue states, we will find more and more of this as it goes. Steve, thanks for joining the show. Thank you, of course, for being. I believe you were the first to break the story. There's a lot of coverage of it now, but I think you were the first back in March. So thank you for. Oh, there you are. You're back. Okay, well, you can wave goodbye now that your camera has returned.
Sorry, Liz. I had to get my camera back on here. I don't have a producer
he
as good
he
as
had to
Spencer,
make
but
sure to show you his face one last time before he told us goodbye. But no, I appreciate your reporting. I mean, I think you were the first to report on this story. There's been a lot of coverage recently in the last month or so, but I think you were the first one to break this story back in March.
certainly in Maine. And I think that this story is only going to get bigger. We're working on some stories which I think we'll be able to share with your audience
Yeah.
about the Maine Care program that I think will be jaw dropping to people to see the extent that this program has been abused. And what we're really seeing is that a lot of the activity that you see that you would just look at it and say that's wrong. Like Americans, the people of Maine, they shouldn't be leaving themselves open to be abused like that. It's actually totally legal because these programs
Yeah.
have been created by Democratic lawmakers specifically to be exploited to create a pipeline of money to flow into these migrant communities. They're using the Maine Care program as almost like a wealth transfer from old Mainers to new Mainers, and it can be
Mhm.
nothing less than deliberate.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really good point. You and I were discussing this earlier. So, um, it's a really good point to note that when something is structured legally, it doesn't make it moral. That something can be corrupt and immoral without it being a crime. And that's it's almost worse actually when that happens because at least if it's a crime, we have this like societal level acknowledgement that it's the wrong thing to do. But if we have it codified into law that you're actually allowed to be immoral and corrupt and essentially legally steal, that's I think much worse. And that's what's happening in Maine. And again, it's not just a small obscure state in the Northeast of the United States. This is happening all around the country, and it's infuriating. I mean, people see the young people especially can't even afford to buy a house for their family. They can't even afford a starter home because the prices are so exorbitant. We see this all across the board that things are becoming less and less affordable, and to see people who shouldn't be in our country in the first place taking advantage of our system, being given these opportunities by Democrat politicians with ulterior motives to be able, as you said, to legally steal from citizens of the United States. I mean, it's beyond what the American people should tolerate. This is not something we should allow to happen in our country.
And
And again, I
the other
appreciate
thing
you
that I would
reporting on
say
it.
is that I guess some of the national media haven't picked up on yet is that the reason Gateway was allowed to exist is because they were useful for the Democratic Party in Maine. And if you look at the contracts that they got that were funded by the CARES Act and other COVID era spending bills that were pushed through by Biden, they got federal COVID money to go into migrant communities and give people walking around money to buy groceries for migrant households, to sign them up for Medicaid and to sign them up for SNAP or food stamps. And under federal law, if you help someone sign up for food stamps or Medicaid using federal money, you are required to give them assistance registering to vote. So what the Democrats effectively did is deputize Gateway Community Services at the same time Abdullahi Ali is plotting to run for president of Jubaland. They're giving him federal money and deputizing him to go out and register migrants to vote. And then all of a sudden, right in the run up to the 2022 election, Janet Mills blows Paul LePage out of the water and he loses Lewiston for the first time in his political career. It's not a coincidence that these groups are getting huge amounts of money from Democratic controlled institutions. And then they're turning around and registering votes in these predominantly Democratic communities. It's a symbiotic relationship. The Democrats are benefiting just as much as the migrant groups are from what they're doing. It's cold, it's ruthless, but it's all politically calculated, and it's aimed at building their power, securing their power, helping them stay in office.
Yeah, it's a form, in my opinion, of election rigging. Um,
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I mean. What else can you say if somebody from Gateway Community Services, they called them community health outreach workers or CHOWs, they're showing up at a house, They're buying groceries for up to 10 people, giving them walking around money, signing them up for food stamps, and then keeping a database of all the people that they've effectively bribed. And then they also create a political arm within their same office called Community Organizing Alliance. And one of the former Gateway employees goes out and knocks on their doors and can collect their absentee ballots, can ensure that they're voting, can ensure that they're voting for the right people. The ballot harvesting that can be happening through the Gateway operation, all paid for by taxpayer money, could easily swing any statewide election in Maine for the foreseeable future until something is done about it. And oh, by the way, Secretary of State Shenna Bellows, who tried to kick President Trump off the ballot in 2024, she has openly admitted now that non-citizens are voting in Maine's elections. She said on Mark Elias's podcast, which I'm sure nobody here listens to, that
Sometimes we do. We're suckers for punishment.
yeah. But she said non-citizens are registered to vote. She admitted it after calling me unpatriotic for reporting on public records that pointed towards non-citizens being registered in Maine's to vote in Maine's election. She called me unpatriotic for reporting on that and tried to demand that I turn over my sources to her. Now she's just laughing with Mark Elias and admitting that yes, that is in fact happening here in the state of Maine. So if you're a 60 or 70-year-old military veteran in northern Maine, you can rest assured knowing that Shenna and the Community Organizing Alliance are canceling out your vote by ensuring that some asylum seekers who just came into the country a year ago are able to vote in our elections.
Who, by the way, not just asylum seekers who came into the country a year ago, but asylum seekers who came into the country a year ago who now aspire to be warlords in Somalia. Literally. Literally.
Exactly. Although I'm
Literally.
told Gateway Community Services lawyers penned a response, and they said that it was racially tinged to use the word warlord in reference to what they're doing. But I maintain that warlord is an accurate term when your claim to power rests on how many guns that you can afford to buy for your militia.
Yeah, what does that have to do with skin color?
And nothing at all. It's the cries of racism, or now they're claiming that they're receiving threats. This is really like the last refuge of a scoundrel.
Oh my word, that's hilarious. Your camera went off again, so I'm gonna let you go because it's weird to talk to you when you're not on cam. Thank you for being
Sorry,
on the
Liz.
show. This was it's really informative to see how they rig this stuff and how corrupt it is and how it's all tied together. It's terrible. Guys, you can find him on X as well. Maine Wire, great reporting up there. Great reporting. All right. I want to give a shout out to one of my favorite sponsors. When I got into politics initially in high school, I didn't get into politics like in a general sense. I specifically started engaging in activism on behalf of the pro-life cause because this has always been something that's been near and dear to my heart. The fact that there are vulnerable babies who are being aborted every day, and it's so wrong. It's so heartbreaking. It's so grisly. It's so bloody. It's nothing that we should accept as a society. These are the most vulnerable among us, and we as Christians, as conservatives, as human beings should be standing up for them. And it's one of the reasons now I'm so happy to be partnering with Preborn because as you and I get ready to celebrate Christmas, celebrate the gift of life, we have the opportunity to share that same gift with a mother and her baby. Imagine a young woman facing an unplanned pregnancy. She feels alone. She's unsure of what to do. She might not have anybody supportive in her life. She might even be facing coercion to abort that child. And somewhere deep inside her heart, she's searching for hope. She's searching for a way to keep that baby. And that's where Preborn Ministries comes in. I mean, think about some of these names: Steve Jobs, Andrea Bocelli, Steph Curry, Jack Nicholson, Celine Dion, Oprah. Do you know what they all have in common? And no, it is not that they are rich and famous. It's that they were all unplanned. And so many others, maybe you were unplanned. I have no doubt that you know someone, that you love someone who was. And that's the thing. God's plan of redemption often works in the unplanned, doesn't it? When a woman is struggling to make a life-altering decision, Preborn Network of Clinics is there. Every mother that Preborn serves faces this moment of decision when she sees her baby's face on that ultrasound. Did you know that a mom is more than likely to choose life when she sees her baby on an ultrasound? You can be part of that. You can make that happen. You can save that baby's life for just $28. You can show that mother the image of that tiny, precious life inside her womb, and you can help her be more likely to choose life for that baby, a life that could change the world. And this Christmas, thanks to a special matching grant, your gift is doubled. That's just $28 To donate, dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. And when you say that word, when you hear your voice say the word baby, know that it's not just a word, it's a person that you're saving. That's pound 250 keyword baby, or go to preborn.com/Liz, preborn.com/Liz. And I want to thank everybody who supports Preborn too. As I said, I am proud to partner with all of the sponsors of this show, but Preborn's work is valuable, life-saving work that you make possible. And I'm so deeply grateful for you. All right, guys, make sure that you are subscribed to the show, youtube.com/Liz Wheeler, x.com/Liz_Wheeler on Spotify. We're the Liz Wheeler Show. You'll recognize it because you'll recognize my face when you hit subscribe. You can leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, too, if you want to make my day. Make sure you go back and watch yesterday's episode. Highly recommend if you want to learn the reality, what the evidence shows, what the facts say about the Egyptian planes that we were told were following Eric Kirk. Well, I'll show you the truth about that. Also, the truth about whether the FBI contaminated the crime scene at UVU. Did they pave over the crime scene before law enforcement could gather evidence? We talk about that. Also, the 30-06 round that Tyler Robinson fired from his rifle that killed Charlie Kirk. Is it possible for that round to kill Charlie Kirk and not to leave an exit wound? We discussed that with a ballistics expert on the show yesterday. You can find it simply by going to yesterday's episode on YouTube, on X, on Rumble, on Facebook, or on Spotify. Thank you for watching today. Thank you for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show.